All right.
All right, everybody, this is D.H. Thorne here with S. Ben Kane and Carrie. And of course, this is from the Ashes Publishing. So, hi, everybody.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey guys.
So, we like to get together once a week on average. We can't make it every week, but we try to get together and just kind of hang out and talk about things magical and mundane, just whatever, because, why not? We're a house, we're having a good time together, and we're doing what we can. So, we wanted to, it's a little bit early, so we want to wait for more people to filter in, and I'll probably repeat this a few times, but we're going to try to open up the floor tonight a little bit so we can get some viewer questions and some viewer, what you guys have on your mind we want to discuss. So that's probably going to be the focus. This is more of just a hangout. There's no topic tonight, so whatever comes up, comes up. But Kane's sporting the badass biker jacket tonight, so he's looking rather dapper.
It was just something as for fun, and then I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna go on like this. So, and you got to live in the moment, you know.
You got to live in the. I mean, it's finally getting cool enough now where you can. Well, at least where I am, like the nights go down in the 60s now.
Maybe where you're at, but not where I am. Not for damn sure.
Yeah, man. You're like, hey, come here. It's great. I'm like, no, it's fire there. It's fire. You live on fire. I don't.
I live on fire. Yes.
You live on fire. What about you, Carrie? What's the weather? I can't believe we're talking about the weather. What's the weather like where you are?
Oh, it's terribly humid and hot.
It's the worst.
I have been staying off the trail so I don't get eaten alive by the mosquitoes.
Yeah, there are definitely a problem here.
Someone needs to invent a country or a climate that's always like 60 to 75 and maybe goes down to like the 40s at night, like something like that. Like
I can deal with that. That sounds like a great place. You should make that.
I'm trying, but I just can't get my weather manipulation to work very well. In fact, it seems to do the opposite of what I asked. I'm like, man, I wish it was cooler and raining today. It hasn't rained in like a week, It's just
Right. Yeah, it hasn't rained forever here, so. Oh, man.
So T. Camilla's here. Ethan Ross is here. It might be a little bit of a quiet night tonight, so we'll just hang out. What were you going to say? You were going to say something?
No.
Good. What is that like? One of my favorite movies, Fifth Element, when he's trying to get what's his name to say something, and he's like, "How are you doing tonight?" And he's like, "Good."
Yeah, right.
So one thing that sort of came up a little bit was we were joking around about like George Burns. Actually, we were joking about George Burns and how he lived to be in his hundreds and 100 plus, even with all the smoking and drinking and everything he did. Maybe we should discuss a little bit the topic of longevity and immortality and any role that the occult or magic or the spirit world might have to play in that, if any. What do you guys think? Do you think that there is anything to that, or do you think not with George Burns per se, but
like it's a little late for that. He's passed now, so I don't know that he made that. It's an interesting subject. I get a lot of requests about it, especially those who are within the vampiric current. They're looking for an immortality of sorts. The way science is going, they say if we could last out 30 more years, that is going to actually be obtainable. That they're learning how to reverse the aging process. And, it's even been talked about how aging is actually a disease, which is really kind of an interesting concept that we catch from each other somehow. I think that there are creatures that are immortal, which is a lot of people don't know that, but there are jellyfish that do actually live forever as long as they can keep regenerating their cells, which they do. There really isn't a time limit on how long they can live. That being said, I can see that being replicated within the human body and that technology, if you will, being transferred from that creature or creatures like it to humans. But that leaves it's interesting because it changes the whole dynamic of what humanity is. And Usually we have an idea of when we're going to expire. at some point, and how we choose to live our lives and decisions that we make. So it completely, once that would happen, you would be transhuman, essentially. You would, I don't know that the same human condition would even apply anymore.
Right.
Those things that we take as meaningful moments or precious to us, essentially they would be innumerable if there is no time limit. And does that diminish how we view life, how precious it is, et cetera, et cetera? So it's an interesting concept to kind of think about and theorize about.
One thing I would say is that death gives life meaning. Obviously, I mean, that's something that most advanced mystics would tell you, that death is a blessing. It's not a curse, and it's not a bug. It's a feature, I guess. And but I'm familiar with that jellyfish you talk about. We're talking about telomeres and things that might be able to let your cells continue to grow forever and replicate forever. And they've actually done studies on mortality in general, and if they remove all natural causes from the equation, it turns out that the average lifespan isn't infinite, nor is it even that long. It's only actually a few hundred years longer, because of all of the ways that we can die, from accidents to war to famine to everything else. The average lifespan, even if we inoculated everybody from death, would still probably only average a few hundred years. It wouldn't actually be thousands and thousands of years. You'd of course have a few outliers. You'd have a few people who never die. But
sure.
One thing I found was, when I was talking to someone about this recently, was right now when a person dies, it's tragic, but we kind of go, everyone's got their time though. We don't really, as much as it upsets us, there's an undercurrent of that's what waits for us all, and it's tragic, but it's part of life. If, however, we made it so that you could not die, I think death would be seen in a much more tragic light, because now you are looking at a situation where people should live forever and they don't. I think a lot more people would be more stressed out about life. They'd be much more inclined to take extra precautions and stuff like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think people would be more freaked out than they are with death as a possibility.
I didn't really consider that, but I think that that's very valid. Once that equation that's taken out of the equation, then it would be especially tragic if somebody had passed from this plane and could not be here again, because it would be something that would be a norm or expected, if you will.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's expected too, people can deal with it. Like, when we think about the industry and the world that's built up around, mortality, you have between the funeral homes and everything, the medical industry and everything, it doesn't actually serve them to eliminate death completely either. They'd rather phase it out slowly enough. So I don't think, even if the technology arose in the next 30 years, I really don't see it hitting the market, hitting the shelves for generations, because they'd lose too much money. You'd need almost like a Johnny Mnemonic situation. Have anybody seen that movie where they find the cure for this big plague and they won't release it because it costs they don't make as much money on curing it as they do treating it. And I think that might happen too.
Man. It's been a while.
It's a good movie. That started it all. Keanu before he was Matrixy Neo. I mean,
yes.
He was still wooden back then, very wooden. Carrie, you've been a little quiet. What do you think about the subject of immortality? Do you think and I also want to, before I ask that question, I want to make a division here that I do believe that we are immortal beings. It's just our mortal body has an expiration date, and I do believe that when we pass, we don't keep our memories necessarily. But we'll go into that maybe in part 2 of the question. Carrie, what do you think of the topic of immortality? Do you think it's possible? Do you think magic can influence it in any way?
Oh, I definitely think it could. I mean, when you spend enough time in the presence of the ancients and you're absorbing their power and their energy and you're elevating yourself, I think that there's every potential to at least extend some longevity in a practitioner's life. And in the regenerative properties as well. I mean, if you work with certain ones, they can pour into you some things that would help you maybe otherwise, not be able to restore yourself. So I think the same way that we approach maybe healing, we can also look at the restoration of our longevity as something that we can pursue. I mean, I'm with you. I don't believe that I believe that we have an immortal soul. Our spirit goes on because we are just clay vessels right now. And
Mm-hmm.
what lives inside of us, the real us, is spiritual. We're spiritual beings. So I believe that longevity can be enhanced in time. Technology and medicine and stuff. Mankind's being enriched by that knowledge. But by the time, like you said, down the line, when it's actually applicable to the human race, it may take a generation. You know.
You guys are really depressing me because I'm hold out on this whole 30-year situation, and you keep talking about generations from now.
I mean, it's kind of like the whole spaceship thing. Like, they're like, oh, the next generation or two, they'll be all like off in space, and Carrie's resizing all over the place again. This is just, there he goes, that
I'm
cell phone again. Let me fix her up again.
growing and shrinking.
It's kind of like the kids who grew up loving Star Trek were convinced that by the year 2000 we'd all be living on moon bases or something.
Right.
And and not only are we not doing that, but what little there will be is going to be like our great grandkids, and it's like, bye, have fun exploring other planets without me, you fucks. You won't even know why it's amazing. I often think, when I think about immortality, I think of my grandfather, because he lived to the ripe old age of 94. Most people on my father's side live very long. And he lived from the teens up until a few years ago. I think it was 2014. And so he would tell us stories about what it was like. He grew up in the same area of Long Island I did. And he would tell us stories about what it was like to grow up on, I guess it was a potato farm, just a farm in general, near where I am, and living under oil lamps and the early electric lights. And when he was a young boy, they would take a wagon into New York City to sell the produce and all that stuff. And they would go there for the day. It would take all day to get there. They'd spend the night. They'd sell their produce. And he remembers very vividly the lamplighters going around lighting all the lamps. And they had big stables in the city and all this stuff. And it was an adventure. I mean, imagine the adventure back then of doing that. And then he would come home.
Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, that you have somebody that could actually tell you that existed at that time, that's still living now. That's amazing. How far we've come in just that length of time is phenomenal.
Right. And he would tell me this story. And you know how he told me that story? Via email on a computer that he built himself. You know what I mean? It was like, this is insanity for a lot of people. This is like, he really lived the world that we wish we did in a way. He really lived that dramatic time shift, because he went from, oh, we're flying now. His first car was a Model T Ford that he bought. It was one of the first kinds of cars you could get, obviously. And he was, just all this stuff that he saw develop, the space race. And he was actually an engineer for CBS that produced the record that went on the Voyager spacecraft.
Oh, so, I watched a documentary about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and now his name isn't really. He was just like he just did work on it. It wasn't like he was a major player in it, but he got a copy of it and all that, and he all this stuff, and he was all the stuff he did, and he lived an awesome life. I mean, it's like I would wish we could all experience that. And our kids, for example, like my kid, he doesn't know a world without the internet. He can't imagine what it was like. He doesn't even really remember a world where he had a phone that wasn't wireless. He never experienced a corded phone.
Right.
And sometimes, like, we get our nostalgia on for like the 80s and 90s and stuff, and I'll be like, oh man, I miss that so much. And then I'll watch like a movie from them, like, oh, that was so corny. We really like this stuff.
Yeah.
So imagine you are immortal in that sense as well, or even just maybe you live 200 years instead of maybe 100. So you go from where you are now, and you get to see whatever comes next, and how amazing that would be. I mean, I'm excited to just see what happens like by 2050. If I make it 2050, that'll be pretty cool, like what'll happen by then. And by then we might be living to 200, like you said. Maybe they'll have cured it in such a way. I don't know.
Right. This actually reminds me of a book called The Hunger that was written where they were looking for a cure for this situation. Very vampiric, of course, but Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting the research and what's going on right now, and to have, so like you said, you're like your grandpa living through this kind of age from Gotham by gaslight essentially to building a computer. It's that is kind of what I would wish to experience, and I've experienced quite a bit in my lifetime. From yes, being on a corded phone to my S9 that I've got at the moment. So it's interesting how things are moving forward, but it hasn't been, oh, we're flying now, kind of a jump.
Like, yeah, it hasn't been like that. I think the next jumps will be inner space. There'll be computers, virtual reality, virtual worlds, things like that. I think that's what we'll probably be seeing.
Right.
I think that, you know, I'm not sure how else to explain it. I don't think that we're going to have some kind of major revolution in science that lets us go to the stars anytime soon. I think that's a dream that's probably not going to be, revealed in our lifetimes at all. Probably not even for several generations. We've got to get over our current problems of, how we administer ourselves before we can figure out certain things, I think. But, it would be wild. I mean, would we be ready? Like, okay, let's pretend you were an immortal vampire. Let's pretend you were, right? For real. And you could live for the next 1,000 years, minimum. And what it would be like, just trying to relate to people of that future time, let alone, in between. I mean, I notice even in my own life, like as I get older, like I'm finding it pretty easy to stay in the loop, but I'm noticing now that there's words that I have to catch up on, and I do, but it's, like slang and pop culture that is just starting to become like, oh, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I try to imagine, like, let's say I did live forever. Can you imagine how out of touch you'd be, like 1,000 years from now?
Well, that's why
like, what would you do?
Like if you eliminated death, like why I said you would be transhuman. It would not. You would be so completely different. It reminds me, I guess, a lot of the descriptions of vampires in some of Anne Rice's novels, where they've lived for so insanely long, but they have no real grasp of the current reality or society that they're immersed within. So it's yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of people that I've talked to about this particular subject that say I don't want to live forever, and that's interesting. They actually choose to have an end point to this reality or this yeah, I guess reality is a great word that they encompass right now. I'm trying to find another word, but yeah, it's like
I mean, we get sick of everything eventually. Like you can only have waffles so often, before you don't like them anymore.
I don't know if that's possible, Thorne.
Well, if they're cult waffles,
I like my waffles.
What do you think, Harry? Do you think you would get sick of
the day, and that was absolutely phenomenal. So you know what? Maybe
that was a good picture of waffles, dude. I was impressed when I saw those waffles. I was like they definitely had black magic all over them. I mean, it was
all over that shit.
It was. Carrie, what do you think about? Would you get sick of immortality? Would you get sick of forever? Do you think you could, or were you already sick of it?
Right.
Am I already sick of it? I don't know. I've been alive for a long time. No, I don't know. I would probably. You would have to adjust to the psychology of outliving everyone else around you. If they could not attain that level of elevation, then that would bear, you would watch your family pass away. You would watch, your friends, your colleagues, and then a whole generation beneath you that you could no longer identify as going up, growing up in your, thousands of, 1,000 years from now. Yeah, it would be a lot. I don't know that I could do it. I don't.
I mean, I would kind of venture the idea that we already do. I mean, I've noticed that, it's almost like when people say, oh, you have your Saturn return and everything changes and your Jupiter return, all these different returns. There is a cycle of rejuvenation of our lives in terms of how we make friends and lose friends, and very few people maintain friends from a young age to death, I think. The fact that we can stay friends for, even 5-10 years sometimes amazes me with the way, especially in the modern era where certain things change so fast in our culture. It seems amazing when we can just even stay friends with people for a few years, let alone, 50, 60, 100, 1,000, you know, I think I'd get sick of people. You know, I think I would get sick of the same people. And I do. Like, I have friends that I just won't talk to anymore for no other reason than it's just like, I don't like you anymore just because I just don't.
Can you imagine the argument you would have after, like, 100, 200, 300 years? You're still talking the same stuff you talked
Yeah.
400 years ago. Stop
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. What is that saying? You can't be a prophet in your own village. And I think if you lived long enough, the whole world would be your village and you couldn't be a prophet anymore. So, so okay, we got some people filled in now. You know, we got Ethan Ross is here, Seeking Serpent, Jackie Nizzles, and Lola Ann Scene, and a few other people. Guys, just so you know, as much as we're talking about immortality tonight, we want to make sure that you guys know the floor is open to questions or anything you want us to talk about. If you want us to see your comment or to respond to a question, preferably put it in all caps so that I can catch it, or in case anybody else is watching the stream, they can catch it. So we'll continue. So on to the subject of, you know, because immortality can have all kinds of meanings. I mean, you could be, like you said, there's different kinds of transhuman. You can become a machine. You could download your brain into a machine potentially and all this other stuff. You know, so at what point do we draw the line between maybe functional immortality of the body and what we believe is probably true about the spirit? Because, you know, almost any spiritual person believes that the spirit is immortal, or at least something about it is eternal. Whether it's our awareness continues or not, nobody's sure, but we seem to all believe that there's an immortality to our energy, to our spirit, to our self.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up. I'm sorry, forgive me.
No, that's okay. I was actually going to start passing it around. So what do you think, like, what would, you know, J.B. Perry made a good point the other night. He said, life is not about accumulating stuff because you can't take that with you. It's about accumulating energy, emotions, and experiences because that you can.
Right.
And so my only caveat to that is, you know, do you take your memories with you or not? Because that your memories are stored in your biology. Does that somehow upload, or is that, you know, so what do you think? We're just, you know, for conjecture's sake, what do you think, or what do you believe? What have you found on that subject?
My personal theory of this whole situation is that we have very many lives. It's almost like the spoke of a wheel, if you will, where our higher self is within the center. And each lifetime, we actually plan it out to experience different things. Perhaps this life, it's tragedy and heartache. But perhaps the next life, it's joy and fulfillment and wealth. You know, everything to be experienced. And once death occurs of that physical body, yes, essentially, you're uploaded into your main collective. And once that spoke has been completed, the cycle has been completed, you are a whole spiritual being. And it's interesting. I see this a lot in tarot, where, you know, the star card will come up, and the star card, yes, it's hope and joy and destiny and things, but destiny is really what really rings true to me. It's something that I find within people's timelines, that is what I call a fixed point, and that's no matter if they're on a higher octave or a lower octave, if you will, looking at it as a sheet of music or a bar of music, regardless of their paths that they take. It's almost like a choose adventure, where you can choose your own adventure, where you can take many different paths, but essentially if you're meant to experience something, you're going to experience that. And that's sometimes pre-planned by our higher selves from before we get here. So it's interesting to watch that come up, because I'll know, okay, well, whatever it is that you're going through right now, whether it be positive or something negative, vibrationally wise, it's something that I know is meant to happen for them to experience. So that's my personal belief of it. Yes, we are immortal, but all of these different lives that we live are to experience certain elements of human existence and bring that information back to a collective that, once is done, is completely whole as a spiritual being.
That's a pretty complete theory, and it's good in the sense that it gives you things to work towards. It gives you something to, and one of the things that comes up is, like you mentioned, like these key points in your timeline. It's almost like a root note in a song. Like every song's got a couple of notes that have to be played, and,
right,
you know, sometimes repeated even. What do you think, Harry? Do you think that, you know, in relation to this topic of immortality of the spirit, what do you believe that's all about? Do you think that you can take your memories with you? What continues on? What is it that continues? Do you think, if you had to be given an answer?
I definitely embrace Ben's wheel prospect as kind of an adaptation of what I believe as well. As far as the memories, that is something that I struggle with because I really do feel like I have memories from my previous existence, but they're so suppressed and they're so deeply embedded that sometimes when I'm doing workings or communes with the ancients, I could feel these things kind of coming out, but I can't tap into them. I'm not at that place in my spiritual development yet, but I believe that as you ascend into your next phase of your spiritual ascent, I think that you do take a certain amount of that core of the person that you were in the last life, and it adds to the next processions as you continue on over and over again in your ascension. At least that's essentially what I believe, although I struggle with it. I do.
Yeah, I think, again, these are things that a lot of different cultures and a lot of different individuals have found. And I would say that like all of you guys, I have my ideas, but I also don't know. I haven't died yet in this life, and I haven't brought anything back with me. But I operate on a couple of assumptions right now, metaphysically speaking. One is that our experience is a dream, it's a delusion, it's based on inputs from our environment. And so what we think of as us is a very limited, perspective. And time is also part of that illusion. It's not that time doesn't exist in a sense. It's more of a perception. It's more of a like when you read a book, the book is all there, and the book happens for you in sequence because you read it that way. And time could be thought of as the same thing. The spirit realm, most people agree, is more or less timeless or fluid in time in some manner. Time doesn't work the same way there.
Precisely.
And if we are spirit in general, then it should be the same for us. We should be timeless as well, which means there is no past and present and future. Time is actually a product of our biology, perhaps. That's just a working theory. There's also the question of, is our body a container or a vessel or an avatar or a robot, basically, for spiritual conscious? And I think that there's, if we go back to like the Vedas, if we go back to, the old Gnosticism and Hermetics and all that, there seems to be this prevailing principle of monism, of singular nature of the ether, of a single source of energy, of origin for things, and that our experience of life is more like our body is a receiver of consciousness. It takes, like, consciousness maybe is a field throughout the entire depth and breadth of the universe, and our biology, by nature of its composition, is like an antenna that absorbs it and maybe channels it. And one way to think of it is almost like how you'll have like a light bulb or something, where if you put energy into it, it will not emit, but it will oscillate and create light in the universe. And in the same sense, you can't have that anywhere else because it's a light bulb. The light bulb is only where it is. And in the same sense, a human biology is localized in this material place that it is. So we experience reality from a local position. But when this biology breaks down and dies, that consciousness should be able, to echo out back into the universe. And the question is then, what goes with it? Is it just memories? Is it just experience? Is it just, as you said, how much of it is a feedback loop? Does the consciousness generate these bodies for us as well? And I'm very strongly of the mind that it does, because of my revelations with Azazel and some other spirits. I was given a very strong impression, and some of this was metaphorical, but that one way to look at it, jokingly, it's a little bit of a joke, is that Adam and Eve weren't kicked out of the garden. They just basically passed out and are having an acid trip in the Garden of Eden, basically thinking that they're mortals, and that's a joke, but that's kind of like what may have the origin of our spiritual self. There might be a higher self, as you said, sitting there somewhere, dreaming a mortal life, and then when the dream ends, they wake up and they go, "Oh, that was cool. Next time I want to be, next time I want to be a monk in Tibet, or next time I want to be a millionaire." And that feeds into what you said about like the spokes and these hard, these focal points that are set in stone, perhaps. And I would wonder then, you know, if that is the case, then we must take something with us, you know, right? I mean, if somehow our experiences must be going somewhere, and in my trinity of self-interpretation of reality, it would be almost as if, you know, the void doesn't generate experiences; it absorbs them. It generates the things that it experiences. So I wonder, how much do we take with us? And I wonder, does it matter if the spirit is timeless? Do we actually grow and improve, or are we just always experiencing something new? And that's the point. And I wonder. These are questions we may never answer, I guess. But
Right. I mean, what you're asking is beyond death and beyond these kinds of situations where there really is just only speculation. We really have no idea. I mean, yes, we have ideas of like afterlife, afterlife experiences or near-death experiences as they are in the eyes, but we don't really understand what takes place after death has occurred. And every culture has their own concept of it. They all have their own ideas. Yes, some are very similar, but some are very drastically different as well. I mean, I've
yeah,
had
that's true.
people, yeah, and Jesus is there and grandma
I mean, the
too.
Egyptians,
You
that
know,
was a very different. Yeah,
there's a lot of different interpretations, and it almost makes me wonder if what we experience at first is something that we have expected to experience. Something pre-programmed almost, because I've read a lot of different books on the subject where if you're a Christian, you will see Jesus waiting with open
yeah.
arms. But if you're something completely different, if you have a completely different religion or not one at all, that you have a completely different experience, and so it makes me question whether this is legit at all, or is this something that's almost pre-expected or pre-programmed to a certain extent, as far as what we're expecting to see and then do see, which this ties into so many other different conversations.
It does. It does. And I mean, I am of the mind that we create our universe. I am of the mind
Right,
that we are the God and devil. And where that, cookie crumbles is hard to say.
right.
Is it focused here, or is it, like you said, pre-planned? And I'm open to both. I think that because I think the nature of the ether is timeless, that yeah, maybe we do pre-plan it in a certain sense, but time doesn't really exist. It's an illusion. So for us, it's real, and it's real enough. And it's so fascinating. And I'm going to say this much: if I die and I'm still aware of myself, and I don't see you guys like in the afterlife, like coming to visit me in my astral tower and shit, I'm gonna be pissed because I'm gonna like make, like there's gonna be a cooler there. We're gonna have, we're gonna have a good time. But in all seriousness, that's the other end of it too, though. And that's why I made that joke. Is we have this idea of necromancy and ghosts and awarenesses continuing after death,
Right.
and what exactly is that? And one question is, let's just say, just hypothetically, that my interpretation is right, and that there's a universal consciousness, and we filter it into these bodies and create a personality to be a vehicle for it. So when we die, what happens to that personality? Does it disappear? Is it an egregore, or does that go along with it? So, and what are we contacting if we're contacting something?
There's two parts. There's two parts to what you're talking about that I've learned. One is, it's interesting with necromancy that you bring up. Yes, necromancy can be performed. What's interesting, though, is that if you wait too long, that person may have already been reincarnated, and there is no way to contact them. When I do work with people and that are trying to contact spirits of their past or their relatives or whatnot who have passed recently, it's best to do it as soon as possible, because if you wait too long, they may move on. I do believe that there is a period of rest between lives, and that contact can be achieved. But if you wait 50 years or 20 years, the likelihood goes down essentially each year that you wait. So, I do believe that there is a gestation period or a waiting period that is between lives. And I think it's for the human soul, if you will, to kind of regenerate itself, kind of replenish itself, if you will.
I mean, one of my theories is that what we call a soul or whatever is an egregoric entity that we create for ourselves as like an avatar. This is a theory. and that when we do necromantic arts, we're contacting that egregore. And yes, egregores can wear out. They can get tired. They can, if no one's believing in them anymore, and no one's interacting with them, they fade. They have nothing to feed upon, or they just, like other things, maybe they figure out a way to continue, and you can get all kinds of long-term spiritual contact, I think. So, I mean, but I agree also with you that there is, a sweet spot for contacting them. And Ethan Ross had mentioned something about hypnosis for past lives. I have, and to see if you're experiencing things. I don't know if he said past lives, but I think that's what he's getting at. I used to use, hypnotic past life regression all the time, and there was always a question of how much of this is real and how much is a dream.
Right.
And a lot of these things were not of this world, and I had to say, I don't know what I'm experiencing right now. I'm experiencing these worlds that can't exist in this universe. What am I experiencing? Is this an astral dream? What is it? What about you, Carrie? What do you think? What do you think, Pessa? Do you think that like the spirit continues on and can be channeled later? Do you think that it is the spirit? Do you think it's an egregore? Do you think it's maybe an echo, a pattern? What do you think it is that we're working with when we do a necromantic channeling or something? What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think it could be a whole lot of different things. I believe that there could be echoes. Like, for instance, one of the things that I have been involved with was going to places where there has been traumatic incidents and observing and getting a feel for the energy there, and we happened to be out in the field one day with several of my students, and we picked up on what felt like a human spirit, there in the woods, and there had been known that there was a violent place, that things that had happened there. So I guess my thoughts would be, when it comes to a traumatic exit of someone's life force like that, is there that energetic echo, that ripple that will always be there as a result of that human suffering and that memory?
Mm-hmm.
Is that often mistaken for, for a human spirit? Other
For the
times,
actual
I do
person,
believe,
What they call residual, essentially.
Yeah, is it a residual?
yeah.
Or
Did you
they,
guys
I believe
ever?
that's what the
they,
case
if you,
law, actually.
right. They even say that, certain houses or buildings or places actually have memories themselves
Yes.
and play these situations back that have been. It generally tends to be situations with high amounts of emotional energy that have exploded: death, life, traumatic experience, something that, if you will, kind of makes its mark or etches itself within time itself. And these places actually will play back these memories, these episodes that have occurred. So there's a lot that goes into that. Is it But Crowley actually talked about spirits himself and believed that they were shells of ourselves, that we actually passed on, but that there was a shell of that contained our knowledge of this life, our memories of this life. And so even though it wasn't us, it was a remnant of us.
Yeah.
So
It's
and
kind
you
of like that egregore I was talking about. Like, we create
right,
this egregoric shell, this mask, if you will.
precisely.
Yeah, that's just, I didn't even know that about Crowley. So, like, some of these things, like, I just intuitively figure out or think about or get from spirits, and that's why I love talking to people who know and have experienced this longer than me and all this. I love confirming things that I thought I found, or at least getting a similar idea. One thing, have you guys ever seen the movie? It was an older movie. I think they remade it, and it kind of sucked, the remake. I love the original, The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh
You
yeah,
guys
yeah.
ever see it? With Roddy McDowell. And one of the things I got a real kick out of that movie about, besides the fact that the band Lestat sampled some of that movie and made an awesome fucking song, is that that movie really was probably the first, in my awareness, that really tried to do justice to the theories of spirituality at the time. And I think some of them still hold water a little bit now with what we deal with. In this movie, for those who haven't watched it, these ghost hunters, if you will, go to explore this house because a lot of bad stuff's happened in it since the owners died, and so they bring all this equipment to try to test for spiritual activity. It's like the original Ghostbusters in a way,
Right, it
and
is.
and it's very dark. It's very 70s. They did a perfect job of it. It's very moody. It's got Roddy McDowall in probably the only role where I didn't laugh at him the whole time, just about half the movie instead of the whole thing. And but it was really just very moving. And one of the things that they did was they showed how, and if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to give it away too much, but they showed how this house was charged with this energy and that kind of a thing. And it really brings up the question: can we, through occult means, and I do believe we can, in some way enshrine our fate? And I think that that's kind of like what a lot of religions do, is they either, because you worship God enough to the point where he gives you heaven, or you do this and you pass through all the trials of the afterlife with your Book of the Dead, and you balance out the scales and you're let to live in the afterlife, or whatever it is. You build up your future, your fate for yourself. And one of the things that I have been trying to work on now is this initiation, this creation of, if you want to think of it this way, kind of like an astral abode, where when my time comes, if I do have a continuation, I want to have a home base. I want to have a place of power where I can begin from, and to kind of work through that, if that's possible. So I try to, when I can, either through meditations or through magic work or through communing with spirits, I try to, if you will, increase spiritual pressure, so that when the time comes, I don't just go and wisp away into nothing. And that's a question. Do you think that there's anything to that? Do you think maybe that's already what we do already? I mean, what do you guys think of that idea?
I think that we definitely keep a consciousness. I think that it's interesting, what we're talking about kind of touches upon a lot of the Temple of the Vampire teachings, where they give offerings of energy to what they consider the undead gods. We talked about this, I believe, in a previous podcast, but if they don't give energy to those spirits, to those undead gods, they essentially die out. They die. It's like an egregore, if you will, where if there's no attention or energy being spent upon them, that they will dissipate into nothingness. That's also another thing that's interesting. It's a little bit of a different subject, different spin-off, but it's been said that this light that a lot of the Christians speak of going back to the light, it's very much like a bug light, if you will. Like, don't go to the light, because it's not so much it's going to zap you, but in a different kind of sense, where it's like, okay, let's say that God is a schizophrenic and he's trying to learn about himself, so creates all these different people to experience all these different things at the same time. So when you pass away, essentially you're sucked or downloaded into a collective that is no longer you as an individual. There's a lot of Don Juan teachings that go into that, and how to maintain yourself from being eaten from what they consider the eagle. Which is the same concept of what I just spoke of. It's all about trying to keep individuality. And if we look at that situation, that kind of goes back to Satan, Lucifer, separating himself, saying, no, I don't wish to do this. I wish to be an individual separate from God. So it's a separation that essentially brings about immortality or individuality on a spiritual level, that you're not going to be devoured and downloaded into a main collective. And so it kind of spans a lot of different traditions, but it has a resonance.
Mm-hmm. It does. And I think that's kind of the core of most people's idea of ascension in some capacity. The left-hand path is about, I see it one of two interpretations, and both to me are equally kind of valid. They kind of mean the same thing. If the right-hand path means rejoining with the deity, the earth, the Gaia, whatever it is, the left-hand path is about not doing that in some capacity. And
right,
you can, I think there's two ways you can do that. I think one is to, like you said, say, refuse, I'm not going back. The other way is to identify as that deity already, and it's not just I'm not going back, I don't have to, I'm already master of my world, fuck you, I'm going to do what I want. And I think that, either way we become God somehow along the path. We either be absorbed by God and become God, or we become our own our new budding off universe that is
What a
ours to create.
horrifying thought to think that you and your consciousness essentially will no longer exist, that you're only simply a part of something else that will, download you into itself.
Like
Uh,
becoming the Borg again, like
I
that episode of
prefer
Star
not
Trek.
to believe this and will fight
Yeah.
against this. And again, that is the difference between right hand path and left hand path. That is essential core. If you really want to get down to it, and it's, do you want to be absorbed and follow this light of godliness, or would you choose to follow Lucifer or Satan and reject this and become an individual? When I was doing research for Thumiel, the idea of what evil was separation from God. Evil was
Yep.
separation from God, or what they considered the Godhead, in Hebrew mysticism. So in my personal belief, there's chaos and there's order, and there are people that are drawn to but one or the other. Those who believe they walk a middle path, I walk the shadow light. I can work with both. I think they're a little confused at this point, but eventually they'll settle into one or the other. There really, to me, there really isn't a middle ground that one walks in this situation. And I know I'm going to probably get a lot of comments on saying that, but
Not for me. I get annoyed because when I was younger, I was big on the I'm a gray wizard witch, blah 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 blah. I walk both sides. I believe in both and blah blah. You can't. There isn't a both. You're walking the fence. Eventually, you're going to fall one way or the other. Eventually.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. They're either confused or really haven't just settled yet. But it comes down to, what do you want? What are you seeking? What do you accept within your reality? Do you believe that you should get upon your knees and say you're unworthy and work with something like this? And again, I'm going to say something controversial here that, again, will probably get a lot of comments. But in my personal belief, being homosexual or heterosexual is not a choice. It is something that is born. You're born with this. It's not something you choose to a lifestyle you choose one way or the other. And in my teachings with my students is, you are either born of chaos or you are born of order, and you will naturally flow to which side that you go to. And the same thing goes for the beings that we work with. There are those that are positive or negative, and not necessarily positive or negative, but chaos or order. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I would say, we have to be careful because, and I don't want to offend anybody commenting on it, because Seeking Serpent says, I choose to follow Lord Lucifer and Lord Satan. That's a right-hand path when you do that, if you're doing it that way. Lucifer doesn't want you to follow him. Lucifer wants you to find your own power.
Your own path. That's exactly it. It's individuality. He sees you as, in my interpretation, sees you as a brother or as an individual soul. Does not want worship. That's what he fought against. So, it's essentially you're getting on your knees to one deity to walk over to the other side of the fence to get on your knees to another. It's pointless. It's pointless.
Correct.
And so it's about raising yourself up. As I've said before, Lucifer doesn't want you to worship him. He wants to take you by the hand and raise you up so you can look you in the eyes. He can look you in the eyes and you can be free. It's about freedom and separation and being able to explore the world, ask questions. See, I don't like necessarily the title of black magic or black magician or chaos magician. There's a lot of titles that are thrown around. I see myself personally as a seeker of truth without restraint. And so that kind of blows those things away. I will use those terms, black magician or whatnot within certain books because of the content and because of the subject matter and how it works in. But essentially, it's about being free and not being a slave.
Yes. Because the constraints are put there by mankind. We constrain ourselves. We're our own worst constraint.
Right.
We always figured that we have to have a start, a middle, a finish. Look at the texts of the things that were written throughout time. In the beginning was, and then here's the end. And they figured that the human life should follow that way of thinking. And it's not at all the way it is. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, I often see, for me, Lucifer is, he's the light, he's this, that, and the other thing, but he's also, maybe even more so, he's a mirror, and he's an honest mirror. Because Lucifer despises self-deception. Lucifer despises, he may be the king of lies in a sense, but if you're going by the Christian tradition, which I don't think really is fair, I
No,
think
not.
if anything, I think he is the king of self-deception in that he hates it. He would much rather you lie to others than yourself, and to thine own self be true is like something Lucifer like probably wrote himself and passed through Shakespeare. It's the most important line in, I think, the human condition, in so many ways, is that we spend so much time trying to deny ourselves, and trying to, like, oh, I got a bad habit. No, I don't do that. We have so many. You need
Right.
to embrace the darkest part of yourself, and don't deny it to yourself. You can deny it to the world. You can say, oh no, I've never done anything bad, but you can't say I never thought it, because you did. And one of the first things you find when you learn to meditate is these dark thoughts come bubbling up. When you first start meditating, you tend to have them a lot more, because you're no longer stuffing them down, in some way, and you have to embrace them. So I think we're getting close to time. We got about 10 minutes left or so. Let's see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I think we'll start aiming towards the wrap-up conversation. Someone had asked, Lola Ann Seen had asked, what about our higher guardian angel? Is that part of us? And what part? And is that part of us, or are we part of it? And what happens when we die with that?
I mean, that's what a lot of people would consider your HGA, or higher guardian angel, or higher self. A lot of different ways that it's been said. So it kind of goes back to the whole spoke situation of learning through each lifetime, and then essentially becoming one. But that's simply only my interpretation of that situation.
What do you think, Harry? Do you think there's anything to that? What do you think happens with that, if anything?
Honestly, I'm right along with what Ben just said. I'm kind of in that camp.
I mean, for me, like, the idea of a higher guardian angel is, if it serves you, enjoy it. It's not for me. I don't see it that way. I don't see it as separate. I don't see anything like that in my life or experience. I've seen, unless all of the spirits that I'm working with are just masked for that higher guardian angel, perhaps. That's one way you could look at it, I guess. But I'm not dogmatic like that. I think that the universe is a lot simpler. The universe is, the Mother Nature is a dirty, muddy, sweaty, hairy creature that isn't so clean and isn't so humanized. I think Mother Nature and the universe is very simple in its patterns, and it doesn't create complexity just for the sake of complexity. And when it does, it's not humanized. And this idea of a guardian, a personal guardian angel, or a higher guardian, whatever you want to call it, in the law of nature, would kind of fly in the face of what we experience in a lot of ways. I'm not
Right.
saying it's not true. I'm not saying it's not true. It's just, if it's true, it doesn't. I don't think it fits in that neat little box. And I think we have to, like, that's one of the things I like about the Necronomicon, and the idea of the Watcher. And I love this idea that your Watcher is you, and like you had said, like this, it's this part of you that is, the Watcher to me is a much more interesting way of looking at it. It's the observer of your life. It's your internal self, perhaps, looking out, and doesn't think, doesn't react. It just observes. It's the Watcher, and it's the conduit through which this experience flows. If that's what it is, that makes sense to me in a sense. But this idea that you've got like a, whatever vision you have of it, of a fluttering angel, or just the higher, this entity that is somehow taking you by the hand, and that sounds very right hand path, and it doesn't necessarily work for me. Now we might have
Yeah.
lost Kane, but oh, there he goes. Let's see. Ooh,
There he is.
we might have lost him. Give me a second. Carrie,
Mm.
can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Yeah, I don't hear you. Oh, we had a crash. Crash a doodle do. I don't know. Carrie, can you hear me on this one?
I can hear you.
You're waving like you can hear me, but I can't hear you, so I don't know what that's going on. I think
Oh,
I will
good
close
times.
this, and I don't think that'll fix it. Ooh, that's messy, whatever happened. Well, guys, I think we're going to end it here just because we're having a technical flub. I think Kane's connection got broken, so it did something with my OBS. I'm not picking up the audio anymore. So I think we're just going to say goodnight here, and we will be back probably next week to do another stream. And we really appreciate you guys being here. Make sure that if you have not yet already, please go to FromTheAshesPublishing.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Check out our magical services if you want to support us. Espen Kane has a whole lot of books on Amazon. You can find them by searching his name. Carrie Darkstar, please go to her channel. She's got a really incredible channel. Go to my channel, DH Thorne, on YouTube, and of course on Facebook you can find me. And I just recently came out with a book, Become the Maelstrom. If you're interested in my methods of magic, you can catch me there. Carrie, I know you can probably hear me, so if there's anything else you want to say, I can't hear you, so wave at me when you're done. I don't know if you're still there. Maybe you're gone. Nope, maybe you're gone. Yeah, I think you're gone. Okay, so she's frozen and gone. So the whole thing crashed. Guys, I apologize, but thank you for coming here. And we'll be back again, hopefully next week, the same time. All right, guys, check you later.